The 45th president of USA and the 47th president of USA both have the same parents. How is that possible?
They got the same parents?
Yes,
Oh, okay.
I don't get the question. They siblings.
they're not siblings.
Oh, you saying they got the same parents, but they're not siblings?
No. The 45th president
Yeah.
and the 47th president have the same parents.
Same parents?
Parents, yeah.
And you saying how do they have the same parents?
Yeah.
I don't think that's a typical question, bro.
This is easy.
The 45th.
Young Thug walked into Icebox, picked up over $200,000 worth of jewelry, and walked out without paying the full amount. And the store let it happen. Not just let it happen, they documented it. Photos, videos, social media posts, they treated the whole thing like a moment worth celebrating. Then, months later, they filed a $365,000 lawsuit and positioned themselves as the wronged party. That gap between what happened in the store and what happened in the courtroom is where this story actually lives, because once you understand how the jewelry business in hip-hop really operates, the lawsuit starts to look like something more calculated than a simple case of unpaid debt. Here's exactly what happened, who had leverage, and why the way it ended might be the most revealing part of the entire situation. Young Thug walked into Icebox, one of Atlanta's most recognized jewelry stores, a place with deep roots in hip-hop culture, and selected multiple high-end pieces. Rolex watches, diamond bracelets, custom chains. The total bill crossed $200,000. He didn't pay it all up front. According to reports, he paid somewhere between $90,000 and $100,000. A substantial portion, but not the full amount. The remaining balance, somewhere north of $100,000, stayed open. For months, that balance sat. Payments slowed. Icebox reached out. Private conversations happened behind the scenes. Nothing resolved it. Eventually, the store moved from private pressure to public action, filing a lawsuit not just for the remaining balance, but for $365,000 total. The jump from the original amount to that figure included added damages and legal fees on top of the core debt. The moment the lawsuit went public, the story changed. Blogs picked it up immediately. Social media turned it into a debate. Young Thug's name started appearing in headlines next to words like "didn't pay" and "owes money," a specific kind of framing that sticks to an artist's reputation in ways that are hard to shake. But here's the context that most of those headlines left out. In hip-hop's jewelry world, the transaction that happened between Thug and Icebox isn't unusual. It's actually a standard part of how the business operates. Jewelers, especially in Atlanta, regularly allow major artists to take expensive pieces without full upfront payment. The reasoning is economic, not charitable. When an artist with millions of followers wears your chain in a music video, tags you in an Instagram post, or gets photographed at an event with your piece on, that's advertising. Real advertising. The kind brands pay significant money to manufacture, and here it's happening organically in front of a built-in audience. So jewelers make a calculation. The exposure value of having this artist wear our jewelry publicly is worth the risk of a delayed or partial payment. It's treated as a marketing investment disguised as a credit arrangement. The problem is that this system almost never gets formalized properly. There are rarely clear contracts defining payment timelines, what happens if payments slow down, or how the promotional value gets factored into the total owed. Everything runs on relationships, reputation, and unspoken expectations. Both sides operate as if they understand the deal, and often they do, until circumstances change and the conversation about what was actually agreed becomes impossible to have cleanly. That's exactly what Thug's team argued when they responded to the lawsuit. His camp's position wasn't simply, "we'll pay eventually." It was more pointed than that. They suggested Icebox had been actively encouraging him to take more jewelry, knowing his image would promote their brand. From their perspective, the arrangement wasn't a standard credit transaction, it was a promotional partnership. And the terms of that partnership were never clearly defined in a way that protected him. When the payments slowed down, the story suddenly shifted from flexible relationship-based deal to unpaid debt. A reframing that happened entirely on Icebox's terms, because they controlled the narrative when they filed publicly. That argument resonates because it identifies a real structural problem. In a deal with no formal contract and no clearly defined terms, whoever moves first in a legal context gets to define what the deal was. Icebox moved first. publicly, with a specific dollar amount. That created the story before Thug's side had a chance to establish any alternative framing. And Thug's situation wasn't isolated. Soulja Boy had been through something nearly identical with the same store. Years earlier, he had built a significant tab at Icebox, one that reportedly reached around $200,000 after fees and penalties were added. The situation followed a similar trajectory: relationship-based access to expensive pieces, payments that eventually stalled, escalation into a legal dispute. Two different artists, different time periods, same pattern. When something happens once, it can be a complicated one-off. When it happens again with a similar structure, it raises a reasonable question about whether the system is designed in a way that predictably creates these outcomes, not necessarily through bad faith, but through the kind of structural ambiguity that consistently benefits the party with lawyers and filing capacity more than the party with followers and visibility, because Icebox wasn't losing in either direction. Before the lawsuit, they had Young Thug wearing their pieces publicly and consistently. That's free advertising reaching the exact demographic that buys high-end custom jewelry. After the lawsuit, their name was trending across every hip-hop media outlet. New artists were hearing about Icebox again, some for the first time. Whether people sided with Thug or with the store didn't matter for brand visibility. The name was back in the conversation at scale. That's a specific kind of outcome that doesn't happen by accident in a business that understands attention as currency. At the same time, the store's core argument has real merit. They gave out jewelry worth hundreds of thousands of dollars. The product was delivered and worn. A substantial amount was paid, but a substantial amount wasn't. In a straightforward reading of the situation, that's an unpaid debt, and a business is entitled to pursue it legally. There's nothing inherently deceptive about extending credit to a high-profile client and then seeking recovery when payments stop. The tension lives in the space between the straightforward reading and the actual dynamics of how the deal was structured and communicated. Thug may have genuinely understood the arrangement as something other than a conventional payment plan. Icebox may have genuinely expected a more structured repayment. Neither of those things can be true simultaneously in a courtroom, which is partly why the case never got to one. It was dropped. Quietly, without a public resolution, without a stated winner, without a final dollar amount disclosed. Private settlement is the most likely explanation. Some agreed amount, some agreed terms, both parties signing off on confidentiality in exchange for the case disappearing. That kind of resolution happens when both sides decide that the cost and exposure of a full trial outweighs whatever they'd gain from it. For Thug, avoiding a public judgment against him made sense. For Icebox, a guaranteed payment, even at a reduced amount, may have been more valuable than the uncertain outcome of litigation. The silence at the end of this story is more informative than it might seem. A store that files a $365,000 lawsuit and is genuinely certain of its position doesn't typically drop it without public explanation unless the private resolution satisfied them. A rapper who was being framed as someone who took jewelry and refused to pay doesn't quietly agree to close the case unless the terms were workable. What the silence suggests is that both sides found the situation more manageable through negotiation than through a courtroom, which is usually what happens when both sides have exposure they'd rather not put in front of a judge. But the questions the case raised about how this system operates don't get resolved by a settlement. They just stop being actively litigated. The jewelry business in hip-hop runs on relationships, visibility, and a credit structure that rarely gets formalized in ways that protect everyone equally. Artists get access to pieces that build their image. Jewelers get promotion that builds their brand. Everyone benefits when the relationship works. When it doesn't, the person with legal infrastructure and the ability to move first typically shapes how the story gets told. That's the real exposure this situation created. Not of one artist who fell behind on payments, but of a system where the terms of the deal are often clear to no one until someone decides they need to be. Young Thug and Icebox both played the game. They just had different understandings of what game they were playing. Do you think this was genuinely just an unpaid debt? Or was the deal structured in a way that made this outcome predictable from the beginning? Drop your take in the comments. Subscribe for more breakdowns on the business moves happening behind hip-hop's biggest stories.